Welcome back, everyone. We've got a ton of great listener questions and sources to dive into today, all dealing with something pretty fundamental, building character.
You all have sent in some really thought-provoking stuff, particularly focused on the role of the family, which is so crucial.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, our core text is going to be David Isaacs' 1984 work, which many of you mentioned. So let's get right to it. Our mission today is to really pull out the key insights from Isaacs and your other sources to understand how these virtues we hear so much about, how they actually take root and grow.
Especially within the family.
Right, especially in the family. And we're going to try and grasp why this whole process of character development even matters, both for ourselves personally, but also for the well-being of society as a whole.
It's a huge topic, but a fascinating one.
It really is. So Isaac starts off with an idea that I found super intriguing. He talks about the family as the first school of human virtues.
Yeah, right from the beginning, it sets the stage for everything else he talks about. It shows us how these fundamental qualities, these virtues, are instilled in us almost from day one.
And what's interesting is that he doesn't see these virtues as separate, isolated things. He emphasizes how they're interconnected, how they kind of develop and support each other as we grow.
It's like a web almost, a web of virtue.
Exactly. So let's unpack this idea of the family as the first school a bit more. Isaacs describes it as a unique group of relationships. And what's shared most deeply within this group is intimacy. It's where a person's innermost self is revealed and nurtured.
In a way that you don't really find anywhere else.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Isaacs draws this sharp contrast between the type of acceptance you find within a family and the type you often find in other settings. He says, within the family, you're generally accepted just as he is, whereas in other organizations like a sports team or a company, acceptance is often conditional.
You're accepted based on what you do, what you achieve, your function.
Right. It's performance-based. So he's saying that the family provides this unconditional base for who we are, and from that base, our core values can develop, unlike those performance-driven settings where you have to prove yourself constantly.
Makes you think about all the different messages we get about worth and acceptance as we grow up.
For sure. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it highlights the family's role in providing that sense of security and permanence that Isaacs keeps talking about. These are like the roots, the emotional and historical roots that are so vital for our stability.
And it's within this safe and stable environment that a person can develop what Isaacs calls a personal style, a unique way of being in the world that flows from those core values.
A personal style, built on things like generosity, sincerity, loyalty, respect. And because the family is this living, organic unit, it actually allows for those values to be lived out, to be embodied, and they gradually become a part of who you are.
It's not just theory, it's practice.
Precisely. And this isn't just some newfangled idea. Isaacs points us back to the Vatican II Declaration, those documents from the Catholic Church that really impacted modern thinking about human dignity. He highlights how they emphasize that true human maturity comes from this balanced development of all these human virtues we're talking about, which is crucial for society to thrive.
Right. It's not just about individual happiness. It's about the common good.
Exactly. So that leads to a fundamental question. How does this development of virtue actually happen? Isaacs highlights two crucial elements: the intensity with which a virtue is practiced and the rightness of the motivation behind it.
He's saying it's not just about going through the motions, it's about the heart behind it.
Yeah, and within the family, a key motivator Isaacs identifies is this desire for personal improvement, but specifically with the aim of serving others within that family unit.
So it's self-improvement that's outwardly focused. That makes sense within the family context.
Absolutely. But here's a really important point he makes, a caution, actually. We need to be careful not to stifle this growth by focusing too much on minor aspects of behavior. Like, imagine a family that's constantly nitpicking, always harping on trivial things. Isaacs contrasts that with a family environment of trust and love, which allows for passionate engagement with the world.
It's about encouraging kids to explore, to take risks, to really live those virtues, not just perform them perfectly all the time.
Absolutely. And this connects to something Isaacs talks about, efficiency. But he doesn't just mean efficiency in like getting things done. He defines it in a way that includes good performance, yes, but also personal satisfaction and continued personal growth.
It's a holistic idea of what it means to live well.
So let's talk about the role of parents specifically. It sounds like it's more than just hoping for the best. Isaacs underscores that parents need a genuine, purposeful commitment to training their children in virtue.
It's intentional, it's deliberate, it's ongoing.
Right. And it ties back to that idea of acceptance we were talking about earlier. Within the family, Isaac says acceptance is primarily for what he is and not for what he does, which is very different from a lot of other structures in society.
And it's such a crucial distinction.
He even brings in another Vatican II decree, Optatum Totius. It talks about human maturity being characterized by stability of character, the ability to make carefully weighed decisions, and sound judgment.
These are all fruits of virtue, of that intentional development we were talking about.
So how do parents actually do this? Isaac stresses that they need to be clearly committed in their minds to developing virtue in their kids, not just going through the motions of family life, but actually paying attention to how intensely their children practice virtue and what motivates them.
It's about being mindful, being present, even in the midst of the daily chaos.
And don't forget the power of example. Isaac points out that parents teach through their own actions as much as, if not more than, their words. Kids are like sponges, absorbing everything.
Right. They see how we handle stress, how we treat others, how we make decisions. They're always watching.
And Isaac also talks about the importance of actively guiding kids, explaining things, asking why to make them think, and exploring the motives behind their actions. He has mentioned that this kind of guidance needs to be adjusted depending on the specific virtue and the child's age.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It requires discernment.
Now, what happens when there's conflict? Isaac brings up a really important point. Sometimes what parents might want for their kids isn't necessarily what the child needs for their own growth.
That can be a tough pill to swallow, but it's a reality we have to face.
Isaac says we need a clear criterion to help prioritize virtues, although he doesn't lay out a step-by-step formula. It's more about encouraging thoughtful consideration.
He also warns against parents having these rigid, preconceived models of behavior that they expect their kids to fit into perfectly.
Instead, he says, focus on sharing those core underlying values that'll create a unified family, but one where each member expresses those values in their own unique way.
Because we're not all cookie-cutter replicas of each other.
Right. And Isaac offers this great suggestion. Cultivate the virtue that gives the most scope for a child's natural strengths to be used in service to others, and that also provides support for their weaknesses.
It's like framing virtue as a tool for personal growth and happiness, not just a set of rules to follow.
Let's dive into some specific virtues. Isaac brings up obedience early on. He says it should be rooted in reasonable demands and motivated by love and the desire to help, which then lays the groundwork for generosity.
He connects obedience to the development of sincerity and modesty, too, especially as kids become teenagers.
He also highlights order as a really important virtue to start developing early on because it has such a big impact on relationships within the family and beyond.
Like, learning to put your toys away is actually good training for life.
Exactly. As kids grow up and start making more of their own decisions, Isaac emphasizes the need for those clear criteria we talked about earlier. He also highlights virtues related to fortitude, things like endurance and enterprise.
And the virtues focused on others. Responsibility, justice, generosity. These become especially relevant for kids because their focus is more on concrete actions at that stage.
And the key takeaway here is that developing any virtue requires willpower. It requires setting high goals. It's about aiming for excellence, not mediocrity.
It's not easy, that's for sure.
Now, adolescence. Isaac says this is a crucial time for aiming high, for channeling that natural idealism kids have into practical service and contribution.
But he warns about the potential for negative influences from outside the family if parents aren't actively involved.
And he introduces this really interesting virtue, simplicity, especially for teenagers. It's about enabling them to live out their beliefs authentically and to be accepted for who they are without putting on a facade.
It's about being real, being genuine.
Then, for those slightly older teens, 16 to 18, Isaac emphasizes virtues based on reasoning, things like prudence, flexibility, understanding, alongside those bedrock virtues like loyalty, humility, optimism.
Their minds are maturing, so those more complex aspects of character become more important.
Let's talk about generosity in more detail. Isaac defines it as deliberately choosing to use your will for something worthwhile, which often involves giving up something you have a right to keep.
It's a conscious choice, a deliberate act of the will.
And he emphasizes how important it is to really think about what we possess, whether it's time, resources, talents, attention. He says we often just give away our leftovers instead of thinking about others' real needs.
It's like we're trying to clear out our clutter instead of actually being generous.
And Isaacs reminds us that a parent's primary responsibility is towards their own family first.
Right, you have to take care of your own before you can truly help others.
Isaacs also makes this great point about how true generosity goes beyond just those people we like or feel close to.
It's not just about being nice to your friends, it's about seeing the needs of others, even strangers.
While little kids might start by trying to please those they care about, true generosity means putting those most in need first.
And he says that giving just to get something back isn't really generosity, it's more like a transaction.
So how can parents foster real generosity in their kids? Isaac suggests presenting them with truly meaningful acts of giving, explaining the real needs that exist around them.
And again, the power of example, can't forget that.
He talks about teaching kids the real value of what they own and emphasizing that giving time and attention can be more valuable than giving stuff.
It's about giving of yourself, not just your excess.
And he talks about teenagers specifically. He says they can lack limits in their generosity, so guidance is key.
It's easy to get carried away with good intentions, but you need to balance that with prudence.
Isaacs argues that lasting generosity is rooted in this conviction that others have a right to be helped, that it comes from love and duty.
It's a beautiful idea that we have an obligation to be generous, that it's not just optional.
He connects it to that idea of giving of yourself, your time, attention, care. It's more than just things. And he ties it all back to love and service, with the ultimate motive being love of God. Even small acts, done with love, can become something great.
It's a powerful message about the potential of every little act of generosity.
Okay, now let's move to fortitude. Isaacs breaks it down into two parts: endurance and enterprise. He says endurance is often harder because it's about resisting a force that feels stronger than you.
And enterprise is about tackling a challenge that feels more manageable.
He gives this great example of endurance from family life. Kids willingly stopping their fun because a baby finally fell asleep and needs quiet.
It's about putting someone else's needs before your own desires.
Isaac says that the virtue of endurance is really developed when a child chooses to resist temptation or to help someone else, even when it's hard.
It's those little moments of self-denial that build character.
He also talks about resisting harmful influences, even when there's no obvious immediate benefit.
Like standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular.
He also clarifies courage. It's about overcoming fear, but always guided by prudence to avoid recklessness. And he brings up preventive obedience, setting clear rules in the family for safety and well-being.
It's about having boundaries, having structure, especially when it comes to safety.
And Isaac suggests a gradual, supportive approach for helping kids overcome fears, with controlled exposure and reassurance from parents.
It's about finding that balance between protecting them and letting them face their fears.
He says to avoid overprotection or forcing a child into a situation they're not ready for.
It's about respecting their pace, their individual needs.
Isaacs even suggests giving a child a positive motive for dealing with something difficult, like offering up their annoyance or effort to God, instead of just focusing on blame.
It's about reframing the struggle, giving it a higher purpose.
And he says complaining actually undermines fortitude, which is about accepting tough situations with a positive attitude.
It's about being a good sport, about not letting setbacks get you down.
He lists the vices opposed to fortitude: fear, foolhardiness, and indifference.
Fear's obvious, but foolhardiness is that lack of caution, and indifference is just not caring, not being engaged.
Now let's look at enterprise, the other part of fortitude. Isaacs defines it as trying something difficult that requires initiative and perseverance.
It's about taking action, taking on challenges, not just sitting back passively.
He says kids are often more motivated by positive undertakings than by avoiding harm.
It's more exciting to build something than just to prevent something bad from happening.
And he stresses the need for strong motivation, often linked to a bigger purpose or goal.
It's about having a why, a reason to push yourself beyond your comfort zone.
And here's another interesting virtue: optimism. Isaac says it's about realistically seeking the positive aspects of any situation.
It's not about being naive or ignoring problems. It's about choosing to focus on the good, even when things are tough.
And he says true optimism requires trust. Trust in yourself, trust in others, and for those with faith, trust in God's help. Confidence, then, is linked to having a realistic view of your abilities.
It's not about thinking you're perfect. It's about knowing your strengths and limitations and believing in yourself.
Isaacs warns against optimism that's just based on constant success. He says we need to relate everything, both good and bad, to worthy goals.
It's about seeing the bigger picture, not just focusing on winning or losing.
And when a child fails repeatedly, he emphasizes showing them love and understanding, but also creating opportunities for them to experience small successes to build their confidence.
It's about finding that balance between celebrating their wins and supporting them through their losses.
Isaacs also says for teenagers, love can be that initial motivation for developing optimism. He says parents should let kids experience those minor failures, the ones that don't have huge consequences.
It's about letting them learn from their mistakes, build resilience.
As they mature, optimism should be linked to their understanding of their own unique purpose in life, not just a desire to be important.
It's about finding your place in the world, your mission.
Isaacs warns against negative criticism and says to always look for those positive possibilities. He also suggests focusing on serving those closest to you, rather than getting bogged down in the world's problems.
It's about starting small, making a difference where you can, rather than getting overwhelmed by the enormity of everything.
And he reminds us that even when teenagers seem to push us away, they still need to feel loved and accepted.
They're going through a lot, trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in.
Now, perseverance. Isaacs defines it as the strength to carry out your decisions, even when things get hard. And he emphasizes having the right motives behind your efforts.
It's not just about gritting your teeth and pushing through. It's about having a reason, a purpose that fuels your perseverance.
He points out that perseverance is essential for all the other virtues. And he acknowledges that little kids have a hard time sticking with things when they don't understand why it's important.
They need that clear why.
Isaacs also talks about the spiritual dimension of perseverance, seeing it as a gift from God. But he says we still need to do our part on a human level.
It's like a collaboration between our effort and God's grace.
He explains that goals that feel too distant or unclear can make it really hard to persevere.
You need that sense of progress that you're actually getting somewhere.
So he recommends setting goals that are achievable, aligned with a child's abilities and character, breaking big goals down into smaller steps.
It's about making it manageable, giving them a sense of accomplishment along the way.
And starting with goals that genuinely interest the child, offering support when motivation wanes. A parent's interest can make a huge difference.
It shows them that you care, that you believe in them.
He identifies inconstancy, that tendency to give up when things take too long or when something more fun comes along, as a major obstacle. He advises against making a big deal out of failures, instead encouraging discussion and a renewed commitment to the goal.
It's about learning from mistakes, not letting them derail you completely.
And anticipating obstacles, offering guidance. Now, here's a tricky one. Isaacs talks about different levels of parental support. Sometimes you do things for the child, sometimes you do things with them, but the ultimate goal is to help them learn to do it themselves.
It's about empowering them, not enabling them.
And he links perseverance to our daily response to God's grace. So how we show up in those small, everyday moments can actually be a form of spiritual training.
It's about seeing the sacred in the ordinary.
Let's move to orderliness. Isaacs defines it as following a logical procedure for organizing things, time, activities, but doing it on your own, taking initiative. He stresses that it's not about order for order's sake. It needs to be guided by prudence and a sense of purpose.
It's about having a system, a method, but it shouldn't become a rigid obsession.
And for parents who aren't naturally organized themselves, Isaac says you can still teach it, especially in those areas where you're actively working to improve. He suggests starting with tasks that have set deadlines, then moving to those with estimated times, then to those with more flexibility.
It's about gradually increasing the complexity, giving them the tools to manage their time and tasks.
And he connects even small acts of order, like remembering your place in a book, to perseverance. So these seemingly minor habits can actually be building blocks for bigger virtues.
It's about those small wins, those daily practices that shape character over time.
Now, while good habits are often learned under orders initially, teenagers need to grasp the reasons behind things like planning their time.
It's about moving from blind obedience to understanding the why behind the rules.
And Isaacs reminds us that even spontaneous actions can contribute to building virtue. but he emphasizes teaching kids the right way to use things, whether it's physical objects or their own abilities. Because just like you can damage a tool if you use it wrong, you can also misuse your own talents.
It's about treating everything with respect, recognizing that everything has a purpose and a proper way of being used.
He connects orderliness with external things to having a tidy mind. And he suggests that a lack of external order might reflect a disconnect between our life goals and our daily actions.
It's about aligning our inner and outer worlds, making sure our actions reflect our values.
Okay, now responsibility. Isaacs defines it as learning to be accountable, both for your own choices and, to some extent, for the choices of others around you.
It's about owning your actions and their consequences, but also recognizing that we're part of a web of relationships where our choices affect others.
He says little kids start by simply doing what they're told, but eventually they need to develop a real sense of responsibility, a conscious decision to act.
It's about moving from blind obedience to conscious choice.
He cautions against focusing just on those easily measured responsibilities, like chores, and neglecting things like cheerfulness and initiative.
It's about recognizing that responsibility extends to all areas of life, not just the tangible tasks.
And he encourages giving all kids opportunities to make decisions, even those who might be naturally inclined toward routine.
It's about challenging them to step outside their comfort zone, to exercise their own judgment.
Responsibility also means acknowledging harm, trying to fix it, and learning from mistakes. Isaac stresses clear communication, good example, simple explanations, and focusing on the goal when teaching responsibility.
It's about providing a framework, a structure, but also leaving room for them to make their own choices and learn from their experiences.
And he connects respecting rules to understanding their purpose, like traffic laws being for everyone's safety.
It's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding that rules aren't arbitrary, they serve a purpose.
He even extends respect to inanimate objects, treating them with care because they serve us, and also recognizing that everything is ultimately a gift from God.
It's about having a sense of gratitude and stewardship for all that we have, both the tangible and the intangible.
This leads into respect for others. Isaac says it should govern all the other virtues. Responsibility, justice, generosity. He says even sincerity needs to be guided by charity and prudence, knowing when to speak truthfully and when to be silent.
It's about choosing your words carefully, recognizing that sometimes silence can be more respectful than speaking your mind.
He points out that how we practice respect changes as we age, since little kids don't fully grasp other people's perspectives.
Their understanding of empathy is still developing.
So parents should emphasize things like property rights and the impact of actions on others' feelings. Teach kids to think about consequences, to avoid provoking or angering others.
It's about helping them to develop that social awareness, that sensitivity to others.
Kids learn a lot by watching how their parents treat different types of people. Isaac says for younger kids, the goal is to build that foundation of recognizing everyone's potential for improvement.
It's about seeing the good in everyone, believing in their capacity to grow.
He even suggests some rules. Everyone's different. Treat them accordingly. Everyone is as they are. Avoid labeling them. Behave kindly. Don't criticize. Act positively. Look for the best. Thank others for help.
It's like a little code of conduct for treating others with respect.
Now, respect takes on a deeper meaning during adolescence, as kids develop a stronger sense of self. Isaac links this to modesty. He talks about the teenage struggle of wanting respect, while not always showing it to others.
It's a classic adolescent dilemma, that hypocrisy of wanting something you're not always willing to give.
Isaac stresses explaining the meaning of respect, discussing the challenges of practicing it with teenagers. Encourage them to think about consequences, to consider others' perspectives.
It's about challenging them to live out the values they claim to hold dear.
Now, respect for parents. Isaac says it should be rooted in love, recognizing their role in our lives and their inherent authority, not just based on their personal qualities.
It's about honoring the role, the responsibility they carry, even if they're not perfect.
And he says that parents making demands is also a form of respect, because it's aimed at helping kids fulfill their potential.
It's tough love, but it's still love.
Ultimately, Isaac says love is essential for respect, and that respect must take into account the other person's situation and needs. True respect sees everyone as a child of God, worthy of dignity regardless of their qualities.
It's a powerful message about the inherent worth of every human being.
Now, sincerity. Isaac defines it as full disclosure, where appropriate, to the right person at the right time. It's not about just blurting out everything you think or feel.
It's about being truthful, yes, but also being discerning, knowing when and how to share your truth.
True sincerity means recognizing and possessing the truth before you disclose it, and it has to be guided by charity and prudence.
So it's not about being brutally honest, it's about being honest in a way that's constructive and loving.
He connects sincerity to humility, saying that humility helps us resist the urge to make ourselves seem better than we are.
It's about being honest with ourselves, first and foremost.
And he emphasizes how self-deception can block sincerity. We compare ourselves to others, we twist situations, we misuse our resources.
It's like we're constantly trying to present a certain image of ourselves, even if it's not entirely true.
Isaac suggests that for adults, the desire for personal growth is a stronger motivator for sincerity than it is for kids, who are still figuring things out.
As we mature, we realize that being honest with ourselves is essential for our own growth.
For kids, the focus should be on helping them understand their ability to be genuinely helpful, to contribute positively. Parents need to be well-informed themselves so they can guide their kids truthfully.
It's about setting an example, modeling that integrity and honesty.
Kids need to see truth-telling as more than just a rule to avoid punishment. Isaacs talks about how the world often prioritizes pleasure and freedom from responsibility, which can make it hard to see our true situation clearly.
It's easy to get caught up in the instant gratification culture, to lose sight of what's truly important.
He recommends giving teenagers full and honest explanations. And he stresses teaching them that different people can see the same thing differently without anyone lying. It's about understanding different perspectives.
It's about developing that critical thinking, that ability to see things from multiple angles.
Isaac says sincerity should be an absolute parental priority, even over other aspects of behavior in some cases.
It's the foundation, the bedrock of everything else.
Now, sharing your inner self should be aimed at improvement, not just random disclosure driven by whims or emotions.
It's about being intentional with your vulnerability, using it for growth, not just for attention.
And he notes that teenagers can have this gap between their intention to be sincere and how they actually behave. Prudence is needed there.
They might want to be honest, but they're still figuring out how to express that in a healthy way.
For younger kids, encourage them to talk about themselves, but also help them learn to distinguish facts from opinions and to recognize what's truly important.
It's about helping them to develop their own internal compass, their own sense of what's true and valuable.
But don't just naively accept everything kids say. Sometimes consequences, even punishment, might be needed for bad habits.
It's about balancing love and firmness, understanding and accountability.
And what about when kids lie to make themselves seem equal or better than their friends? Isaac suggests lovingly acknowledging their good qualities while discussing their desires.
It's about meeting them where they are, understanding the underlying insecurity that's driving that behavior.
He concludes by saying that you can often judge a child's sincerity more by their wrong actions than by their right ones.
It's when they mess up that their true intentions often become more clear.
Okay, now modesty. Isaac defines it as recognizing the value of your own privacy and acting accordingly. He says each of us has this unique inner life, our spirit, body, and emotions, and we need to know how to treat that space with respect, both our own and that of others.
It's about having healthy boundaries, recognizing that not everything needs to be shared or exposed.
As kids discover their own inner world, Isaac says they might either overshare or guard it too closely. He emphasizes that important thoughts and feelings shouldn't just be blurted out.
It's about developing that sense of discretion, knowing when to speak and when to hold back.
Look for signs that kids are recognizing privacy, like wanting to protect their bodies, their belongings, their thoughts and feelings.
It's about respecting their need for space, their need to process things internally.
As they get older, the ability to be silent and alone and to seek guidance for private matters are all signs of modesty.
It's about developing that inner strength, that ability to be comfortable with yourself, even in solitude.
Isaac highlights 3 expressions of respecting privacy: the home, dress, and language. The home is more than just shelter. It's a place of intimacy and growth.
It's a sanctuary, a place where you can be yourself without judgment.
Teenagers especially need their own space, their own privacy within the home.
It's about respecting their need for autonomy, their need to develop their own identity.
Modesty in dress is about respecting yourself and others, avoiding exhibitionism or carelessness.
It's about presenting yourself in a way that's dignified and appropriate for the situation.
And modesty in language means respecting people's private lives, avoiding gossip, crude language, or overly personal topics.
It's about choosing your words carefully, being mindful of the impact they might have on others.
Private stuff should only be shared appropriately with trusted people. Isaacs also talks about external influences that can hurt modesty. Certain social atmospheres, immodest environments, unhealthy relationships.
It's about being aware of the messages we're bombarded with, the pressures to conform to certain standards of behavior.
Teaching kids willpower and critical thinking is crucial for resisting those negative influences. Now, while respecting privacy is key, there are valid times to discuss intimate matters for personal growth or to help others, but it has to be done appropriately.
It's about finding that balance between protecting privacy and seeking guidance or support when needed.
Isaacs advises parents to teach kids about both physical and mental maturity, along with God's laws regarding sex, so they can develop a strong moral compass. He stresses that in purity, nothing is trivial.
It's about treating sexuality with respect and reverence, recognizing that it's a gift from God, not just a physical act.
And he says a family environment with open communication is vital for fostering modesty, especially during adolescence. Things like reasonable curfews, proper dress, careful entertainment choices all help protect intimacy.
It's about creating a culture of respect within the family, where everyone feels safe and valued.
Isaacs emphasizes effort and self-control in the Christian understanding of sexuality, especially for young people. He says youth is a good time for seeing life as a struggle, for not being too attached to comfort and ease.
It's about building resilience, developing that capacity for self-discipline and delayed gratification.
And he says that a strong foundation for sexual education involves self-control and resisting outside pressures. It's about being able to say no to what's wrong, even when it's tempting.
It's about having the courage to stand up for your values, even when it's not popular.
Let's move on to moderation. Isaacs defines it as the virtue that regulates our attraction to pleasure and ensures the balanced use of created goods.
It's about finding that sweet spot, enjoying the good things in life without letting them control us.
He says people who lack moderation are easily manipulated because they prioritize pleasure above all else.
They're constantly chasing that next high, that next thrill, and they become slaves to their desires.
He emphasizes that moderation doesn't necessarily mean giving up everything, but using our senses to enjoy life in a way that glorifies God and fulfills our purpose.
It's about finding joy in the simple things, appreciating the beauty around us without overindulging.
He suggests teaching moderation in using money and pursuing superficial pleasures by focusing on what's practical, useful, and truly valuable.
It's about teaching kids to discern between needs and wants, to prioritize what truly matters.
And learning self-control when you can't have what you want. Everyday life gives us tons of opportunities for that.
It's about learning to delay gratification, to be okay with not getting everything we want right away.
And parents need to model joyful moderation. Isaacs gives the example of giving something up for Lent, a form of self-denial, but doing it cheerfully, not making the whole family miserable.
It's about showing them that self-discipline can be a source of joy, not just a burden.
Motivate kids by encouraging them to offer their small sacrifices to God. Isaacs points out that immoderation leads to wasting time, constantly seeking to satisfy your desires.
It's like you're on this endless treadmill of seeking pleasure.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.